Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. Your endless internet wandering has brought you here, and hopefully you can finally sleep to today's topic. Now before we begin, comment where you are listening from and how late it is where you are at. It is very interesting to see how far and wide people come. Also, please subscribe, it would be very appreciated. Let us begin. In the spring of 1769, on the Mediterranean island of Corsica, a child was born who would one day redraw the map of Europe, shake the monarchies of the old world to their foundations, and come closer than almost any man in history to global dominance. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, born just months after France had wrested control of the island from the Republic of Genoa. That accident of timing, being born a Corsican subject of the French crown, would shape everything that followed. Napoleon's family was minor nobility with Italian roots, but they were hardly wealthy or powerful. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer and political opportunist who quickly pledged loyalty to France, earning a small pension and the chance to send his children to mainland French schools. For Napoleon, this meant exile from his Corsican identity at a young age, attending military school in Brienne-le-Château. There, surrounded by the sons of the French aristocracy, Napoleon was mocked for his accent, his humble background, and his fierce Corsican nationalism. It bred in him a sense of inferiority, but also a drive to dominate. He immersed himself in books, reading Caesar's commentaries, Plutarch's Lives, and the campaigns of Alexander the Great. His love for military theory and history was rivaled only by his resentment toward the French elite. In 1784, he gained entry into the École Militaire in Paris, becoming the first Corsican to do so. He trained as an artillery officer, a branch known for its reliance on logic, calculation, and precision, skills Napoleon mastered early. He graduated in 1 year instead of 2 after his father's sudden death forced the family into financial hardship. Commissioned as a second lieutenant at 16, he entered a French army still firmly controlled by aristocrats and governed by hierarchy. There were few signs at the time that he would rise above this stagnant officer corps. But history would soon tilt in his favor. When the French Revolution exploded in 1789, everything changed. The monarchy crumbled, and the old social order disintegrated. Nobles fled or were executed, and the revolutionary government needed loyal, competent men to fill the vacuum. For ambitious officers like Napoleon, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He supported the Jacobins, aligning himself with radical revolutionaries like Robespierre. Though he remained largely unknown, his political connections and dedication to the revolutionary cause helped him avoid the worst purges. In 1793, Napoleon was assigned to the siege of Toulon, a strategic Mediterranean port city held by royalists and British forces. At just 24, he proposed a bold artillery plan that led to the city's recapture. His success earned him a promotion to brigadier general and caught the attention of powerful men in Paris. Toulon was his first taste of real glory and blood. The aftermath saw brutal repression, and Napoleon did not flinch. He understood that ambition in revolutionary France came at a cost. He returned to Paris a marked man, young, brilliant, and ruthlessly effective. But the political landscape was volatile. After the fall of Robespierre in 1794, Napoleon was arrested due to his Jacobin ties, narrowly escaping execution. It was his first brush with the chaos of revolutionary politics, but also a lesson in survival. Released after a few weeks, he was assigned minor duties in the army. Still, he kept himself ready. The moment to rise again would come soon, and when it did, he would seize it with both hands. After narrowly escaping death during the chaotic aftermath of the Terror, Napoleon's star began its rapid ascent. His success at Toulon had brought him to the attention of the revolutionary government's military leaders, but the political instability meant opportunities came and went quickly. In 1795, Paris was gripped by an insurrection of royalist forces aiming to overthrow the fragile revolutionary government, the Directory. The capital teetered on the edge of civil war. When the royalists marched on the Tuileries Palace in October, it was Napoleon who held the line. Commanding a small force of artillerymen, he deployed what would become his signature tactic, whiff of grape shot, a devastating burst of canister shot fired into the crowds. His quick and brutal response crushed the uprising, securing the Directory's survival. This moment proved decisive. Napoleon was hailed as the savior of the Republic and promoted to Major General. It also marked the birth of his legend as a decisive and ruthless leader willing to use force to maintain order. From this point forward, Napoleon's political and military fortunes would be tightly linked. His relationship with the Directory was complex. He was both a tool and a threat. The new government needed generals to defend the revolution, but they feared Napoleon's ambition. Still, he was given command of the Army of the Interior and later the Army of Italy. The Italian campaign, beginning in 1796, was where Napoleon truly proved himself. Facing a coalition of Austrian, Piedmontese, and Sardinian forces, he displayed remarkable strategic creativity and boldness. His forces were often outnumbered and poorly supplied, yet he consistently outmaneuvered his enemies, winning victory after victory. His rapid marches, surprise attacks, and skillful use of artillery shattered the traditional slow-moving warfare of the 18th century. One of his key tactics was dividing and conquering. He would strike isolated enemy units swiftly before they could regroup. The campaign's highlights included the stunning victory at the Battle of Lodi, where Napoleon personally led an assault across a narrow bridge under heavy fire, and the decisive Battle of Arcole, which solidified his reputation for courage and daring. Beyond battlefield success, Napoleon used propaganda masterfully. He sent detailed bulletins to Paris newspapers, portraying himself as the embodiment of the revolutionary spirit and a protector of France. His charisma and political savvy helped him build a loyal following among both soldiers and civilians. By the end of the Italian campaign, Napoleon had transformed from a relatively obscure artillery officer into a national hero, feared and admired across Europe. Yet even as his fame grew, the political situation in France remained unstable. The Directory was weak and deeply unpopular, struggling to balance the demands of revolutionaries, monarchists, and foreign enemies. This created a volatile environment ripe for a power grab. Napoleon, aware of the fragility around him, began to consider his own ambitions, not just as a general, but as a political leader who could control the fate of France and perhaps the world. By 1798, Napoleon's reputation as a brilliant military commander was firmly established, but he sought greater glory and a path to political power. The opportunity came with the plan to invade Egypt, then a province of the weakening Ottoman Empire and a strategic gateway to British interests in India. The French Directory, eager to distract Napoleon from the turbulent politics in Paris and hoping to strike a blow against Britain's global dominance, approved the expedition. In May 1798, Napoleon set sail with a fleet of over 300 ships and nearly 40,000 soldiers, embarking on a campaign that would combine military conquest, scientific discovery, and propaganda on an unprecedented scale. The invasion began with the swift capture of Alexandria, followed by the decisive Battle of the Pyramids near Cairo, where Napoleon's use of modern tactics overwhelmed the poorly trained Mamluk cavalry. Yet, despite these victories, the campaign was fraught with challenges. The British Royal Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, dealt a devastating blow to the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, cutting off Napoleon's supply lines and trapping his army in a hostile land thousands of miles from home. Isolated and vulnerable, Napoleon adapted by positioning himself not only as a military leader but as a reformer and protector of Egyptian culture. He brought with him a team of scientists and scholars who catalogued Egypt's antiquities, including the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, which would later unlock the secrets of ancient hieroglyphs. This blend of conquest and culture helped him cultivate an image as a civilizing force, even as his army struggled with disease, local resistance, and supply shortages. Meanwhile, back in France, political chaos worsened. The Directory faltered amid economic crisis, corruption, and unrest. Napoleon, sensing the opportunity, began plotting his return. In 1799, he secretly slipped away from Egypt, leaving his army behind, and returned to France to seize power. His return set the stage for one of the most dramatic coups in history. With the help of loyal allies, Napoleon engineered the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the Directory and establishing the consulate, with himself as first consul, effectively the ruler of France. This move marked the end of the revolution and the beginning of Napoleon's personal rule. The Egyptian campaign, despite its setbacks, had elevated his profile and provided him with the political capital to launch this new phase. His vision extended beyond France's borders. Napoleon saw himself not just as a military genius but as the architect of a new European order, one that would spread revolutionary ideals but also cement his dominance. The world was on the brink of a transformation unlike any before, and Napoleon was at its center, poised to reshape nations, governments, and history itself. With the establishment of the consulate in 1799, Napoleon began consolidating power with remarkable speed and efficiency. The revolutionary chaos that had engulfed France for a decade gave way to a new order centered on his authority. His first years in power were focused on stabilizing the nation's economy, reforming its legal system, and rebuilding its military strength, all essential to preparing for the larger ambitions he held. One of Napoleon's earliest and most enduring legacies was the creation of the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive set of civil laws that abolished feudal privileges, standardized property rights, and codified legal equality for men. This legal framework spread across Europe with his conquests, reshaping societies and influencing modern law codes worldwide. Politically, Napoleon was a master of symbolism and propaganda. He portrayed himself as the heir to the revolution's ideals, order, liberty, and national pride, while simultaneously dismantling many of its democratic institutions. He established a centralized bureaucracy staffed by loyal officials and used censorship and secret police to suppress dissent. By 1802, he had been named first consul for life, a move ratified by a public referendum. This gradual accumulation of power paved the way for his crowning achievement in 1804, declaring himself Emperor of the French. The coronation ceremony in Notre Dame Cathedral was a spectacle designed to convey both divine sanction and personal authority. In a calculated gesture, Napoleon crowned himself rather than allowing the Pope to do so, signaling that his legitimacy came from no higher power but himself. Meanwhile, his military campaigns continued unabated. His victories against Austria, Prussia, and other coalitions forged an empire that dominated continental Europe. Through a combination of battlefield prowess, strategic marriages, and the establishment of satellite kingdoms ruled by his relatives, Napoleon extended his influence from Spain to Poland. Yet his reign was far from uncontested. Britain remained the stubborn enemy across the Channel, using its naval supremacy to blockade French ports and support resistance movements throughout Europe. Within France, pockets of royalist and republican opposition persisted. Napoleon's vision of a European empire would demand constant warfare and political maneuvering, setting the stage for conflicts that would define his rule and eventually his downfall. The foundation of Napoleon's empire was now laid, but the challenges ahead, both at home and abroad, were immense. The story of how a Corsican boy became the master of Europe was only just beginning. By 1805, Napoleon's empire faced its greatest test yet. The fragile peace that had followed his coronation was shattered when Britain, Austria, Russia, and Sweden formed the Third Coalition against France, determined to curb Napoleon's growing dominance. Britain's naval power remained unchallenged, and it sought to isolate France economically through blockades while supporting its continental allies militarily. Austria and Russia prepared to confront French forces on land. Napoleon, ever the strategist, moved quickly to meet the threat. His army was battle-hardened and highly disciplined, organized into corps that could operate independently yet support each other. The campaign began with a swift march through Germany, catching Austrian forces off guard. The French defeated Austria decisively at the Battle of Ulm in October 1805, forcing the surrender of an entire Austrian army without heavy fighting. This stunning victory cleared the way for Napoleon to face the combined Austro-Russian forces gathering in Moravia. The decisive moment came on December 2, 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, often called Napoleon's greatest victory. Outnumbered yet confident, Napoleon lured the Allies into attacking what seemed a weak French right flank, only to unleash a devastating counterattack that split the enemy forces. The battlefield was engulfed in fog, which Napoleon used to conceal troop movements and deceive the Allies. The result was a crushing defeat for Austria and Russia, with thousands of casualties and prisoners. The victory shattered the Third Coalition, forcing Austria to sue for peace and weakening Russia's influence in Europe. It also solidified Napoleon's reputation as a military genius and unstoppable conqueror. The Treaty of Pressburg followed soon after, expanding French territory and influence, while the Holy Roman Empire, long a central pillar of European power, was dissolved. Napoleon's control over Central Europe grew, but the war was far from over. Britain, refusing to negotiate, continued its naval blockade and funding of anti-French coalitions. The stage was set for new conflicts, as Napoleon's ambitions and Europe's resistance collided in a series of battles and political struggles that would shape the continent's future. Following his stunning victory at Austerlitz, Napoleon sought to consolidate his power not just through military conquest but by reshaping Europe's economy to France's advantage. In 1806, he launched the Continental System, an ambitious blockade designed to cut Britain off from trade with the European mainland. Napoleon understood that Britain's strength lay primarily in its navy and its global trade network. If he could choke off Britain's commerce, he believed the island nation would collapse economically, forcing it to sue for peace. The Continental System forbade all European nations under French influence from trading with Britain, aiming to isolate the British economy. Napoleon's marshals and allies were charged with enforcing the blockade along the vast European coastline. However, the plan faced immediate challenges. Smuggling became rampant, and Britain's powerful navy still controlled the seas, enabling trade with colonies and other global partners. Some European nations resented the blockade, as it hurt their own economies and disrupted traditional trading patterns. Russia, initially an ally, grew increasingly frustrated with the economic strain caused by the system. Meanwhile, Napoleon continued his military campaigns to enforce and expand his influence. He dissolved the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, creating the Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of German states loyal to France. This move antagonized Prussia, which felt its influence waning and prepared for conflict. The stage was set for renewed warfare. The Continental System revealed both Napoleon's strategic vision and its limits. While it showcased his ability to wage economic war, it also exposed cracks in his empire's unity. The blockade strained relations with allies, sowed resentment among subject states, and failed to deliver the decisive blow to Britain Napoleon hoped for. In the coming years, these economic tensions would contribute to the unraveling of his empire, as resistance mounted both on and off the battlefield. By 1806, tensions across Europe escalated as Prussia, alarmed by Napoleon's reorganization of German territories and growing power, joined with Russia, Britain, and other allies to form the Fourth Coalition. Prussia felt particularly threatened by the Confederation of the Rhine, which Napoleon had created from the former Holy Roman Empire states, seeing it as a direct challenge to its influence in Central Europe. In October 1806, the conflict erupted into open warfare. Napoleon once again demonstrated his tactical genius during the twin battles of Jena and Austerlitz. Despite being outnumbered, French forces swiftly defeated the Prussian armies, crushing their military power in a matter of days. The victory allowed Napoleon to occupy Berlin and effectively neutralize Prussia as a military threat for the time being. However, the war was far from over. Russian forces continued to resist, and Napoleon's Grande Army pressed eastward, pursuing the retreating enemy. The harsh winter and vast distances of Eastern Europe presented significant logistical challenges for the French army. The campaign revealed the limits of Napoleon's power when operating far from home territory. His forces faced supply shortages, fatigue, and guerrilla attacks. Despite these difficulties, the French remained dominant on the battlefield, forcing the Russians to retreat further east. The War of the Fourth Coalition highlighted both Napoleon's strengths as a commander and the growing difficulties in sustaining a sprawling empire through continuous warfare. The conflict further destabilized Europe and set the stage for the vast confrontations that would culminate in Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812. Throughout these campaigns, Napoleon's vision of a unified Europe under French control remained steadfast, but cracks were beginning to appear in his empire's foundation. In 1808, Napoleon's empire faced a new and unexpected challenge on the Iberian Peninsula. Seeking to enforce the continental system and secure his dominance over Europe, Napoleon installed his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as King of Spain after forcing the abdication of the Spanish Bourbon monarchy. This move ignited widespread rebellion among the Spanish people, sparking what would become the Peninsular War, a brutal and protracted conflict that would drain French resources and morale. Unlike traditional battles fought between standing armies, the Peninsular War was characterized by fierce guerrilla warfare. Spanish fighters, known as guerrilleros, used their knowledge of the rugged terrain to launch hit-and-run attacks on French forces, supply lines, and communication networks. The term guerrilla itself, meaning little war, originated during this conflict. The Spanish resistance was bolstered by British intervention under the command of Sir Arthur Wellesley, later the Duke of Wellington. British troops landed in Portugal and allied with Spanish and Portuguese forces to challenge French occupation. The combination of local insurgency and foreign military pressure created a quagmire for Napoleon's armies, which struggled to maintain control over the region. The Peninsular War became a costly drain on French manpower and finances, sapping the strength of Napoleon's forces that were already stretched thin by campaigns elsewhere in Europe. Morale among French troops declined as they faced constant ambushes, harsh weather, and an unforgiving landscape. Politically, the conflict undermined Napoleon's image of invincibility and exposed vulnerabilities in his imperial strategy. The war also had lasting effects on Spain and Portugal, weakening their colonial empires and contributing to independence movements in Latin America. Ultimately, the Peninsular War marked the beginning of a slow but steady erosion of Napoleon's dominance, demonstrating that even a powerful emperor could be challenged by determined resistance and the complexities of unconventional warfare. By 1812, tensions between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia had escalated dramatically. The Russian emperor, frustrated by the economic strain caused by the continental system and wary of Napoleon's expanding influence in Eastern Europe, withdrew from the blockade against Britain. This breach of Napoleon's grand strategy was intolerable. Determined to enforce his will and reassert dominance over Europe, Napoleon assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, the Grande Army, numbering over 600,000 men from across his empire and allied states. In June 1812, Napoleon launched the invasion of Russia, a bold and risky campaign aimed at forcing Tsar Alexander back into compliance. The initial advance was rapid, with French forces pushing deep into Russian territory. However, the Russians employed scorched earth tactics, burning crops, villages, and cities as they retreated, denying the French army the supplies it desperately needed. The harsh Russian summer soon gave way to a brutal autumn, and the Grande Army found itself stretched thin over vast distances, struggling with supply shortages and deteriorating morale. The pivotal moment came at the Battle of Borodino in September, a bloody and inconclusive clash that left tens of thousands dead but failed to deliver a decisive victory. The French marched on Moscow, only to find the city abandoned and set aflame by its own residents. The loss of shelter and supplies forced Napoleon into a disastrous retreat during the onset of the Russian winter. As freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant harassment by Russian forces took their toll, the Grande Army was decimated. By the time the remnants crossed back over the Niemen River, only a fraction of the original force remained. The invasion of Russia marked a turning point in Napoleon's fortunes. It shattered the myth of his invincibility and emboldened his enemies across Europe to unite against him. The campaign's failure exposed the limits of military power in the face of geography, climate, and determined resistance, setting the stage for the coalitions that would eventually topple the emperor. The catastrophic failure of the Russian campaign in 1812 sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Napoleon's enemies, sensing his vulnerability, quickly formed the Sixth Coalition, an alliance that included Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and several German states. Determined to finally end Napoleon's reign, the coalition launched a coordinated offensive against the weakened French Empire. In 1813, the decisive conflict unfolded in what became known as the War of the Sixth Coalition. After regrouping his shattered forces, Napoleon won several battles, including the notable Battle of Dresden, showcasing his enduring tactical brilliance. However, his resources were stretched thin, and the coalition's numerical superiority and growing unity began to take their toll. The pivotal confrontation came at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, in October 1813. This massive engagement involved over 600,000 soldiers from multiple nations, making it one of the largest battles in European history. Napoleon's forces were overwhelmed and decisively defeated, forcing a retreat back into France. The coalition's advance was relentless. In early 1814, Allied armies invaded French territory, marching toward Paris itself. Despite desperate resistance and several valiant battles, including the Battle of Paris, the French capital fell in March 1814. With his empire collapsing around him and support eroding, Napoleon was forced to abdicate the throne in April 1814. He was exiled to the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy, granted sovereignty over the small territory but stripped of his imperial ambitions. Though his reign as emperor had ended, Napoleon's story was far from over. His abdication marked a temporary pause in his quest for domination, setting the stage for one of history's most dramatic comebacks, the 100 Days. Napoleon's exile to Elba was meant to be the final chapter of his tumultuous career, but the man who once ruled Europe was far from finished. Despite the island's small size and limited resources, Napoleon quickly established control over Elba's administration and military. However, he never lost sight of his ultimate goal, to reclaim power in France. News of the restored Bourbon monarchy under King Louis XVIII and widespread dissatisfaction with the ruling regime's weakness and corruption reached Napoleon. Sensing an opportunity, Napoleon secretly planned his escape. In February 1815, he slipped past the British naval blockade and landed on the French mainland with a small band of loyal followers. His return sparked a wave of enthusiasm among the French people, soldiers, and officers still loyal to the ideals of the revolution and the glory of the empire. As Napoleon marched toward Paris, royalist forces sent to arrest him instead defected to his side. Within weeks, the Bourbons fled, and Napoleon reclaimed the throne in what became known as the 100 Days. During this brief period, Napoleon sought to rebuild his army and restore his influence across Europe. He implemented reforms to stabilize the economy and bolster military readiness, aware that the European powers would not tolerate his return for long. The other monarchies quickly formed the Seventh Coalition, determined to crush Napoleon's resurgence once and for all. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would decide the fate of the French Empire and Napoleon's legacy. The climax of Napoleon's return to power culminated in the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, a confrontation that would become one of the most famous battles in history. Facing him was the combined army of the Seventh Coalition, including British forces under the Duke of Wellington and Prussian troops commanded by Field Marshal Gebhard Lebrecht von Blücher. Napoleon, though commanding a smaller force than in previous campaigns, was determined to strike a decisive blow that would secure his reign once more. The battle unfolded on the muddy fields near the town of Waterloo in present-day Belgium. Napoleon's initial strategy focused on breaking Wellington's lines through frontal assaults and intense artillery bombardments. However, Wellington's forces held firm, bolstered by strong defensive positions and timely reinforcements. Throughout the day, fierce fighting raged, with the French army making several costly but ultimately unsuccessful attacks on Allied positions. The arrival of Blücher's Prussian forces late in the afternoon proved to be the turning point. Their intervention split Napoleon's army, forcing a retreat and eventually a rout. The defeat at Waterloo shattered Napoleon's final bid for power. He fled the battlefield and abdicated once again, surrendering to the British shortly afterward. This defeat marked the definitive end of his rule and the Napoleonic Wars, bringing an era of European upheaval to a close. Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would spend the remainder of his life. The Battle of Waterloo became a symbol of the limits of military ambition and the resilience of the Allied powers united against him. Though his empire had crumbled, Napoleon's impact on Europe and the world would endure long after his fall. Though Napoleon's military conquests ended with his exile, his influence on European society, law, and governance continued to shape the continent for generations. One of his most enduring contributions was the Napoleonic Code, officially the Code Civil, enacted in 1804. This legal code simplified and unified French laws, replacing the patchwork of feudal and royal statutes that had long governed the country. The Napoleonic Code emphasized clear rules regarding property, contracts, and civil rights, while abolishing privileges based on birth. It established principles like equality before the law, secular authority, and protection of private property. The Code's influence extended far beyond France, spreading to much of continental Europe through conquest, treaties, and the establishment of client states. Countries from Italy to the Netherlands, Germany to Poland, adopted legal systems inspired by or directly derived from Napoleon's reforms. The Code also laid the groundwork for modern civil law traditions worldwide. Beyond law, Napoleon's reforms modernized administration and education. He centralized the French government, creating efficient bureaucracies staffed by trained civil servants. His support for the lycée system standardized education, training a new generation of professionals and military officers loyal to the state. These changes helped dismantle the old aristocratic order and fostered meritocracy based on talent and achievement rather than lineage. Napoleon's legacy is also visible in the political map of Europe. His reshaping of borders, creation of satellite kingdoms, and weakening of old empires sowed the seeds for nationalist movements that would dominate the 19th century. While he sought to impose French dominance, he inadvertently inspired desires for self-rule and identity among conquered peoples. His career remains a complex mixture of revolutionary ideals and authoritarian rule, military genius and ruthless ambition. Napoleon Bonaparte's life was a defining chapter in the transition from the Ancien regime to the modern world, leaving a legacy that continues to provoke debate and fascination. Napoleon's reshaping of Europe not only redrew political borders but also profoundly influenced the rise of nationalism across the continent. By installing family members and loyalists on thrones and reorganizing territories, he disrupted centuries-old identities and allegiances. In places like Germany and Italy, which were fragmented into numerous small states, Napoleon's conquests helped awaken a sense of national unity among people who shared language, culture, and history but lacked political cohesion. The Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of German states under French influence, dissolved the Holy Roman Empire and planted the seeds for German nationalism. Similarly, in Italy, the spread of Napoleonic reforms and administrative unification sparked early movements toward Italian unification. However, Napoleon's empire also sparked fierce resistance. The Peninsular War in Spain was fueled by fierce Spanish nationalism and a determination to resist foreign rule. Across Europe, popular uprisings and guerrilla warfare challenged French occupation. These conflicts forged a new political consciousness centered on national identity and self-determination, themes that would dominate the 19th and 20th centuries. After Napoleon's fall, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 sought to restore the old monarchies and balance of power but could not erase the nationalist currents unleashed by his rule. The map of Europe would continue to evolve, driven by revolutions, wars, and diplomatic shifts inspired in part by the legacy of Napoleonic rule. In this way, Napoleon's ambition to control Europe paradoxically helped catalyze forces that ultimately undermined imperial domination, ushering in an era defined by the struggle for nationhood and democracy. Napoleon's impact on warfare extended far beyond his own campaigns. His innovations in strategy, tactics, and army organization revolutionized the way wars were fought and influenced military thinking for generations. Central to his success was the concept of the corps system, which divided his army into self-sufficient units capable of independent action but also able to rapidly concentrate for battle. This flexibility allowed for faster maneuvers and better exploitation of enemy weaknesses. Napoleon also emphasized speed and surprise, often marching his troops faster and farther than traditional armies, allowing him to strike before his enemies could prepare. His use of massed artillery, coordinated infantry and cavalry assaults, and emphasis on morale and leadership changed the battlefield dynamic. He inspired his troops through personal example and charismatic leadership, creating loyalty and fighting spirit. His campaigns showcased the importance of logistics and supply, and the challenges of maintaining large armies over long distances and varied terrain. Although his tactics were eventually countered, many principles he developed remain foundational in modern military doctrine. Moreover, Napoleon's wars spurred developments in military medicine, engineering, and administration, as armies adapted to the demands of sustained, large-scale conflict. The legacy of his military genius is seen in the successes and failures of armies well into the 20th century, as generals studied his campaigns for lessons on maneuver, strategy, and leadership. While often celebrated for his military prowess, Napoleon was also a skilled diplomat who understood the importance of alliances, treaties, and political marriages in maintaining and expanding his empire. His diplomatic efforts aimed to isolate Britain and keep European powers divided, preventing a united front against France. Through a complex web of alliances and client states, Napoleon extended French influence far beyond the battlefield. He married twice, first to Josephine de Beauharnais, whose social connections helped him rise in Parisian society, and later to Marie-Louise of Austria, cementing a crucial alliance with the Habsburgs. Napoleon's diplomacy was not limited to Europe. His ambitions stretched toward the Middle East and the Americas, as evidenced by his Egyptian campaign and attempts to sell the vast Louisiana territory to the United States in 1803, a move that raised funds for his wars and reshaped global geopolitics. Despite his efforts, Napoleon's diplomatic strategies faced limits. The aggressive expansion of French power alarmed other nations, leading to repeated coalitions against him. The fragile balance of power in Europe was repeatedly upset, culminating in widespread warfare. Napoleon's diplomatic legacy includes both the spread of revolutionary ideals and the realpolitik of empire building, demonstrating the complex interplay between force and negotiation in shaping history. Napoleon was a master of image-making and propaganda, understanding that controlling how he was perceived was as crucial as winning battles. He cultivated a cult of personality that presented him as a heroic, almost mythic figure, a leader destined to bring order and glory to France and Europe. Through carefully crafted portraits, statues, and public ceremonies, Napoleon projected power and legitimacy. Artists like Jacques-Louis David immortalized him in paintings that emphasized his strength, wisdom, and connection to both revolutionary ideals and imperial authority. Newspapers and pamphlets circulated stories of his military genius and benevolent leadership, reinforcing his image among the French populace and soldiers alike. Napoleon also used symbols and rituals, such as his self-coronation and the Legion of Honor, to foster loyalty and national pride. His control over censorship and secret police helped suppress dissent and maintain a unified narrative. This propaganda machine was vital in maintaining support during difficult campaigns and political upheavals. The cult of personality created around Napoleon set a precedent for future leaders who sought to blend political power with charismatic authority, demonstrating the power of image in modern statecraft. Central to Napoleon's vision of empire was the establishment of a ruling dynasty that would secure his legacy and extend his influence across Europe. Unlike the old Bourbon monarchy he had overthrown, Napoleon sought to create a new imperial family rooted in merit, loyalty, and conquest. He crowned himself emperor in 1804 and later installed his brothers and sisters as rulers of client kingdoms. Joseph Bonaparte became king of Naples and then Spain, Louis Bonaparte ruled Holland, Jerome Bonaparte took control of Westphalia. This strategy allowed Napoleon to maintain tight control over vast territories while promoting his family's status. However, this dynastic approach was a double-edged sword. Some siblings proved ineffective or unpopular, leading to unrest and resistance in their realms. The imposition of French-style rule and reforms clashed with local traditions, fueling nationalist backlash. Napoleon's heir, his son Napoleon II, was briefly recognized as emperor after his abdication but never ruled, symbolizing the fragile nature of his dynastic ambitions. Despite these challenges, the Bonaparte dynasty marked a significant shift in European monarchy, emphasizing meritocratic ideals blended with familial loyalty. It reflected Napoleon's desire not just for military conquest but for lasting political order, even as his empire's fate became increasingly precarious. Though often overshadowed by his military and political exploits, the women in Napoleon's life played crucial roles in shaping his personal and public persona. His first wife, Josephine de Beauharnais, was a key figure in his rise. A widow with connections to the French aristocracy, Josephine's charm and social skills helped Napoleon navigate the complex political landscape of revolutionary and Napoleonic France. Their marriage was passionate but fraught with difficulties, including Josephine's inability to provide an heir, which ultimately led to their divorce in 1810. Despite this, she remained a loyal supporter and close confidant until her death. Napoleon's second marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria was as much a political alliance as a personal union, designed to secure ties with the Habsburg monarchy. Beyond his wives, women in Napoleon's court and family wielded influence through patronage, diplomacy, and cultural activities. Their roles illustrated the intersection of gender, power, and politics during this transformative era. Napoleon's attitudes toward women were complex. He admired strong, intelligent women yet upheld traditional views on their roles in society. Understanding these dynamics offers a fuller picture of the man behind the emperor and the social fabric of his empire. Napoleon's reign profoundly influenced European art, culture, and architecture, shaping the aesthetic and symbolic landscape of the early 19th century. He was a patron of the arts who understood their power to legitimize his rule and glorify his achievements. Under his direction, neoclassicism became the dominant artistic style, drawing inspiration from the grandeur of ancient Rome and Greece, which Napoleon admired and sought to emulate. Architects designed monumental buildings and public works that celebrated the empire, such as the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, commissioned to honor the victories of the French armies. Sculptors and painters created works depicting heroic scenes from Napoleon's campaigns, reinforcing the myth of the emperor as a military genius and enlightened ruler. Napoleon also supported the expansion of museums, including the Louvre, which became repositories for art seized during his conquests, showcasing France's cultural dominance. The period saw an explosion of literature and music that reflected the ideals of the time, blending romanticism with themes of heroism, nationalism, and the individual. Through these cultural projects, Napoleon crafted a legacy that extended beyond politics and war, influencing European identity and artistic expression for decades. Napoleon's relationship with the Catholic Church was complex and strategically managed. The French Revolution had deeply fractured church-state relations, with revolutionary policies severely restricting the Church's power and influence. Recognizing the importance of religion in stabilizing France and legitimizing his regime, Napoleon negotiated the Concordat of 1801 with Pope Pius VII. This agreement restored much of the Church's civil status while ensuring that the Church remained subordinate to the state. The Concordat allowed the government to appoint bishops and regulated church property, striking a delicate balance between religious authority and state control. While Napoleon portrayed himself as a protector of the faith, he was careful to prevent the Church from regaining political power that might challenge his authority. His coronation in 1804 was deliberately orchestrated to emphasize his independence from the Pope, as he crowned himself rather than allowing the Pope to place the crown on his head. However, tensions persisted, especially when the Pope opposed some of Napoleon's policies, leading to moments of conflict and even the Pope's brief imprisonment. Napoleon's religious policies reflected his pragmatic approach to power, using religion as a tool for unity and control, while maintaining supremacy over all institutions within his empire. Despite his many successes, Napoleon's empire eventually crumbled due to a combination of military overreach, political miscalculations, and growing opposition from both within and outside France. The disastrous Russian campaign in 1812 severely weakened his army, leading to losses that he could never fully replace. The failure of the continental system alienated many European allies, who suffered economically and began to resist French control. Napoleon's relentless warfare exhausted France's resources and eroded popular support. His attempts to impose French rule and reforms on diverse cultures and nations often sparked nationalist uprisings and guerrilla warfare, further draining his forces. The coalition of European powers united by a common goal to end his dominance gradually gained strength, culminating in the decisive defeat at Waterloo in 1815. Napoleon's abdication and exile marked the end of an era but also reshaped the political landscape of Europe. The Congress of Vienna sought to restore balance and prevent future widespread conflict by redrawing borders and establishing a system of collective security. The fall of Napoleon also influenced emerging nationalist and liberal movements, setting the stage for revolutions and the modern nation-state. His legacy is a testament to both the potential and limits of individual ambition in shaping history. Napoleon's military career remains one of the most studied in history, with generals and strategists analyzing his campaigns for lessons in leadership, strategy, and tactics. His emphasis on speed, decisive action, and flexible command structures revolutionized military operations. The use of the corps system allowed his army to operate in dispersed formations, increasing mobility while maintaining the ability to concentrate force rapidly. Napoleon's personal leadership style, inspiring loyalty and courage in his troops, became a model for military commanders. He also demonstrated the importance of logistics and intelligence in sustaining campaigns, although his Russian invasion exposed the vulnerabilities of overextension. His successes and failures continue to be examined in military academies worldwide, influencing doctrines from the 19th century through modern warfare. Napoleon's legacy in military science underscores the enduring relevance of innovation, adaptability, and psychological warfare. Napoleon's rule left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape of France and Europe. Beyond military conquests and political reforms, he promoted arts, sciences, and education as tools of state power and national identity. His patronage encouraged the flourishing of neoclassical art, which emphasized grandeur, order, and the heroic ideals Napoleon embodied. The establishment of institutions like the Institut de France and support for scholars and scientists reflected his Enlightenment influences. Under Napoleon, the French educational system was reorganized, with the founding of the lycées, which trained a new elite of administrators and military officers. Literature and theatre during this era often celebrated themes of heroism, sacrifice, and patriotism, reinforcing the ideals of the empire. Napoleon's cultural policies helped forge a sense of unity and pride among the French people, while also spreading French language and customs across Europe. His legacy in culture illustrates how power can be expressed and maintained through intellectual and artistic means, shaping national consciousness long after political change. Napoleon's era was marked by significant advancements in science and technology, many of which were spurred by the needs of his military campaigns and administrative reforms. He understood the importance of scientific progress in strengthening the state and its army. The Egyptian expedition notably included a team of scholars and scientists who documented the region's geography, history, and culture, leading to groundbreaking discoveries such as the Rosetta Stone, which unlocked the understanding of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Napoleon established institutions that promoted scientific research and innovation, such as the École Polytechnique, which trained engineers and military officers with advanced technical skills. His armies benefited from improvements in artillery, engineering, and logistics, which allowed for more effective warfare and infrastructure development. The period also saw advancements in medicine, including battlefield surgery and sanitation, which reduced casualties and improved soldier health. These scientific achievements contributed to the modernization of France and had lasting impacts on European development. Napoleon's support for science demonstrates the interplay between military ambition and intellectual progress during one of Europe's most dynamic periods. Napoleon's reign was marked not only by military conquest but also by significant economic reforms aimed at stabilizing and strengthening France's economy. Recognizing that a strong economy was crucial for sustaining his vast military campaigns, Napoleon implemented policies to improve taxation, banking, and industry. He established the Bank of France in 1800, which helped stabilize the currency and regulate credit, fostering economic growth. Napoleon encouraged infrastructure projects such as roads, bridges, and canals to facilitate trade and troop movements. His legal reforms, including the Napoleonic Code, also protected property rights, encouraging investment and commerce. However, the continental system, designed to weaken Britain economically through a trade blockade, had mixed results. While it disrupted British trade, it also hurt French allies and occupied territories, leading to economic hardship and resentment. Additionally, ongoing wars strained the treasury and caused inflation. Napoleon's economic policies reflected a balance between modernizing the state's finances and the challenges of financing nearly continuous warfare. The legacy of these reforms influenced French economic institutions long after his fall. One of Napoleon's most enduring legacies lies in his comprehensive overhaul of the French legal and administrative systems. The cornerstone of these reforms was the Napoleonic Code, which unified and clarified laws throughout France, replacing the confusing patchwork of feudal and revolutionary laws. It established principles such as equality before the law, secular authority, protection of property, and civil liberties for men. The code became a model for many other countries' legal systems, influencing the development of civil law worldwide. Administratively, Napoleon centralized government authority, creating a highly organized bureaucracy staffed by capable officials selected on merit rather than birth. Prefects were appointed to govern regions, ensuring loyalty and efficient implementation of policies. The reforms streamlined tax collection, judicial proceedings, and public education, strengthening state control and promoting social order. Though authoritarian in nature, Napoleon's reforms modernized France's institutions and laid the groundwork for the modern French state. These changes balanced revolutionary ideals with the need for stability and effective governance, reflecting Napoleon's pragmatic approach to power. Napoleon's impact extended far beyond Europe, influencing independence movements and nationalist struggles across the globe. His military campaigns disrupted the colonial empires of Spain and Portugal, weakening their grip on territories in Latin America. The chaos and power vacuum created by his conquests inspired revolutionary leaders like Simon Bolivar, José de San Martín, and others to pursue independence from European colonial powers. The ideals of liberty, equality, and nationalism that Napoleon both championed and imposed provided a framework for these movements. In the Caribbean, the Haitian Revolution, though predating Napoleon's rise, was further shaped by the broader revolutionary spirit sweeping the Atlantic world. Napoleon's sale of the Louisiana Territory to the United States in 1803 also had long-term effects on the expansion and development of a young nation. His legacy influenced nationalist aspirations in regions as diverse as the Middle East and Asia, where ideas of sovereignty and self-rule took root. By disrupting the old order, Napoleon inadvertently helped accelerate the decline of colonial empires and the rise of modern nation-states worldwide. After his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon was exiled by the British to the remote island of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic, over 1,000 miles from the African coast. The island's isolation and harsh climate ensured that escape was virtually impossible. Napoleon spent his last years in relative solitude, under constant British guard, reflecting on his life, writing memoirs, and engaging with a small group of loyal followers. His health gradually declined, plagued by stomach ailments and possibly cancer. Despite his fall from power, Napoleon remained a figure of immense fascination and controversy. During his exile, he cultivated an image of himself as a martyr to Europe's monarchies and a man misunderstood by history. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died on Saint Helena, marking the end of one of the most dramatic and influential lives in history. His body was later returned to France in 1840, where he was entombed with great ceremony at Les Invalides in Paris. Napoleon's death did not diminish his legacy. Rather, it cemented his place as a symbol of ambition, genius, and the complex interplay of revolution and empire. Napoleon Bonaparte's life and legacy have fascinated historians, artists, and the public for over 2 centuries. His story is one of extraordinary rise and dramatic fall, combining elements of revolutionary heroism and imperial ambition. The myth of Napoleon has been shaped by countless biographies, novels, films, and artworks, each interpreting him through different lenses, sometimes as a tyrant, sometimes as a champion of progress and meritocracy. His impact on law, military strategy, politics, and culture continues to resonate worldwide. Monuments, museums, and annual commemorations honor his achievements and controversies alike. Napoleon's name remains synonymous with leadership, genius, and the complexities of power. The memory of his nearly world-spanning empire serves as a reminder of the forces of change unleashed by revolution and the enduring human desire for greatness. His legacy invites ongoing debate about the costs and consequences of ambition, the nature of leadership, and the shaping of modern Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte's journey began in an unlikely place for someone destined to nearly rule Europe, the rocky island of Corsica. Born on August 15, 1769, Napoleon was the second of 8 surviving children in a family of minor Italian nobility. Corsica itself was newly French territory, having been sold to France by the Republic of Genoa only months before his birth. The island's fiercely independent culture and recent political upheaval colored young Napoleon's worldview. His family was not wealthy but managed to secure him a place at a French military academy. At the age of 9, Napoleon was sent to mainland France to attend a series of military schools, first in Autun and later at the prestigious École Militaire in Paris. His early years were difficult. As a Corsican, he was often treated as an outsider and had to work harder to prove himself. Nonetheless, Napoleon excelled in mathematics and artillery studies, disciplines that would become central to his military success. The French Revolution, beginning in 1789, transformed France into a land of both chaos and opportunity. The old aristocratic order was being swept away, and young men of talent, regardless of birth, found chances to rise quickly through military ranks. Napoleon embraced the revolutionary ideals, though he remained cautious in his political allegiances, understanding the risks of rapid factional shifts. His first notable military achievement came during the Siege of Toulon in 1793, where he distinguished himself by organizing the artillery that helped retake the port from royalist forces supported by the British. This success earned him promotion to brigadier general at just 24. Napoleon's subsequent campaigns in Italy between 1796 and 1797 marked his ascent to prominence. Commanding the French army of Italy, he led a series of brilliant maneuvers that defeated larger Austrian forces and their allies, securing French dominance in northern Italy. His strategy combined rapid marches, surprise attacks, and the decisive use of artillery. These victories made him a national hero in France and demonstrated his tactical genius. Yet Napoleon's ambitions extended beyond the battlefield. Through skillful propaganda, he cultivated an image of himself as a man of destiny and a defender of the revolution's ideals, even as he increasingly centralized power. Politically, Napoleon was astute. In 1799, amid the instability of the French Directory government, he participated in the coup of 18 Brumaire, effectively ending the Directory and establishing the consulate with himself as first consul. This marked the beginning of his rule over France. He quickly consolidated power, balancing revolutionary rhetoric with authoritarian control. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor, signaling his transformation from a revolutionary general to a monarch seeking to dominate Europe. Napoleon's rise from Corsican outsider to emperor was a remarkable story of talent, ambition, and timing that reshaped the course of European history. In 1798, Napoleon launched one of his most ambitious and unconventional military campaigns, the invasion of Egypt. His goal was to disrupt British trade routes to India and expand French influence in the Mediterranean and Middle East. The campaign was not only a military endeavor but also a scientific and cultural expedition, as Napoleon brought along a team of scholars, scientists, and artists tasked with studying Egypt's ancient civilization and natural environment. The initial military phase began with a swift victory over the Mamluk forces at the Battle of the Pyramids, where Napoleon's use of artillery and infantry tactics overwhelmed the enemy. However, the campaign soon encountered serious setbacks. The British Royal Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, leaving Napoleon's forces stranded and isolated. The lack of naval support made resupply and communication extremely difficult. The harsh desert conditions, diseases such as the plague, and resistance from local populations further complicated the French occupation. Despite these challenges, the campaign yielded remarkable scientific achievements. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone by French soldiers was a key breakthrough that enabled scholars to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, opening new understanding of the civilization's history. The scholars' extensive documentation culminated in the Description de l'Egypte, an influential work on Egypt's archaeology and culture. Politically, the campaign was a mixed success. Although Napoleon failed to secure long-term control of Egypt, the expedition bolstered his reputation as a leader willing to pursue bold and global ambitions. His abrupt return to France in 1799, leaving his army behind, was controversial but allowed him to seize power during the political instability at home. The Egyptian campaign exemplified the intersection of military conquest, scientific exploration, and imperial competition that defined the Napoleonic era. It demonstrated both the reach and limits of French power and presaged the increasing importance of global strategy in European conflicts. After years of revolutionary upheaval, France was deeply divided, and religion had become a major source of tension. The revolution's anti-clerical policies had alienated many Catholics and weakened the Church's influence. When Napoleon rose to power, he recognized that stabilizing the nation required healing these divisions and securing broad support. In 1801, he negotiated the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, a pragmatic agreement that redefined the relationship between the French state and the Catholic Church. The Concordat restored much of the Church's civil status, recognizing Catholicism as the religion of the majority of French citizens, but it stopped short of making it the state religion, preserving religious freedom for Protestants, Jews, and others. Crucially, the agreement gave the government the power to nominate bishops and regulate church property, ensuring that the Church remained under state control and could not become a rival political force. This balance helped to ease religious tensions and legitimize Napoleon's rule among a largely Catholic population. Despite this cooperation, tensions persisted. Napoleon maintained strict control over the Church and occasionally clashed with the papacy, especially when the Pope opposed certain policies. The Concordat was a foundation for a new model of church-state relations in France, blending revolutionary secularism with traditional religion, and it influenced similar arrangements across Europe. It reflected Napoleon's pragmatic approach to power, using religion as a tool for unity while asserting his authority. Napoleon understood that a strong and centralized state required a well-educated, disciplined, and loyal citizenry. Following the chaos of the French Revolution, the country's educational system was fragmented and inefficient, lacking uniform standards and a clear purpose. In 1802, Napoleon introduced major reforms that laid the foundation for modern French education. Central to these reforms was the creation of the lycée system, state-run secondary schools designed to train the future administrative, military, and technical elites essential to sustaining the empire. The lycées emphasized meritocracy, discipline, and patriotism, reflecting Napoleon's belief that talent and ability should determine advancement rather than birth or social class. The curriculum combined classical studies, such as Latin, Greek, and literature, with modern subjects like mathematics, science, and physical education. These schools prepared students for careers as officers, civil servants, engineers, and professionals who would uphold the ideals and needs of the Napoleonic state. Admission was based largely on merit, though access was still limited compared to modern standards, ensuring the system cultivated a loyal, capable elite. Beyond secondary education, Napoleon also restructured higher education and technical institutions like the École Polytechnique, founded earlier during the Revolution but greatly expanded under his rule. These reforms professionalized the military and civil service by providing systematic training and promoting scientific and engineering expertise crucial for warfare and infrastructure projects. The lycée system and educational reforms helped to unify the diverse regions of France under a common national identity and fostered a spirit of service and loyalty to the empire. Their influence endures in France's education system today, marking one of Napoleon's most lasting domestic legacies. By investing in education, Napoleon not only strengthened his administration and military but also shaped the intellectual and social fabric of modern France, balancing authoritarian control with enlightened statecraft. From 1803 to 1815, Europe was engulfed in a series of conflicts known as the Napoleonic Wars, which pitted Napoleon's French Empire against multiple coalitions formed by Britain, Austria, Russia, Prussia, and other European powers determined to check his expansion. These wars reshaped the political landscape of Europe and tested the limits of Napoleon's military genius. Early on, Napoleon achieved stunning victories that cemented his reputation. At the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, often called his greatest victory, he decisively defeated the combined Russian and Austrian forces despite being outnumbered. This victory forced the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the establishment of the Confederation of the Rhine under French influence. Similarly, at the battles of Jena and Austerlitz in 1806, Napoleon crushed the Prussian army, demonstrating his superior tactics and organizational skills. His innovative use of the corps system allowed flexible and rapid troop movements, overwhelming traditional linear armies. However, his military dominance was challenged by persistent resistance and shifting alliances. The Peninsular War, starting in 1808, drained French resources as Spanish guerrillas, supported by British forces, waged a brutal and protracted insurgency. The war became a costly quagmire that undermined French control in the Iberian Peninsula. The campaign against Russia in 1812 marked a turning point. Napoleon's invasion initially succeeded but was ultimately disastrous due to harsh winter conditions, scorched earth tactics by the Russians, and supply shortages, resulting in catastrophic losses. These setbacks emboldened the Sixth Coalition of European powers, which defeated Napoleon in 1814, forcing his abdication and exile to Elba. His brief return during the 100 Days ended with a decisive defeat at Waterloo in 1815. The Napoleonic Wars fundamentally altered European diplomacy, inspiring new military doctrines and nationalist movements. The conflict underscored the volatility of coalition warfare and the challenges of sustaining a vast empire through continuous conflict. Napoleon's military campaigns remain a subject of study for their strategic innovation and their profound impact on the modern world. One of Napoleon's most ambitious strategies to weaken his greatest enemy, Britain, was the implementation of the Continental System, a large-scale economic blockade designed to cut off British trade with continental Europe. Introduced in 1806 with the Berlin Decree, the system aimed to isolate Britain economically by forbidding European nations allied with or conquered by France from trading with the British. Napoleon believed that strangling Britain's economy would force it to surrender or negotiate peace on favorable terms. The blockade represented an early form of economic warfare on an unprecedented scale. However, enforcing the continental system proved challenging. Smuggling and clandestine trade were widespread, as British goods remained in high demand across Europe. Many of Napoleon's allies and occupied territories suffered economically, leading to widespread discontent and weakening their loyalty to France. The system disrupted traditional trade networks, causing shortages and inflation in some regions. Moreover, Britain retaliated with its own naval blockades and leveraged its global colonial empire to offset losses in Europe. The failure of the continental system became particularly evident during the Peninsular War, where resistance in Spain and Portugal, countries hurt economically by the blockade, contributed to Napoleon's military difficulties. The economic strain also contributed to unrest in other parts of Europe, including in Russia, where Tsar Alexander I eventually abandoned the system in 1810, precipitating conflict with France. Although the continental system did not achieve its intended goal of forcing Britain's defeat, it demonstrated Napoleon's innovative approach to total warfare, combining military, economic, and political tools. Its mixed legacy highlights the complexities of economic warfare and the limits of controlling large, diverse empires through trade restrictions. Napoleon's influence extended far beyond military conquest and political power. His legal reforms transformed not only France but also many parts of Europe and the world. The Napoleonic Code, officially the Civil Code of 1804, was a comprehensive legal framework that replaced the patchwork of feudal laws with a clear, accessible, and secular system. It established principles such as equality before the law, protection of property rights, the secular nature of the state, and individual freedoms for men, while also defining family law and contracts. The code abolished privileges based on birth and promoted meritocracy, reflecting Enlightenment ideals filtered through Napoleon's pragmatic governance. Importantly, as Napoleon expanded his empire, he implemented the code in conquered territories including Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, parts of Germany, and beyond. Even after his defeat, many countries retained or adapted elements of the code due to its clarity and modernity. The Napoleonic Code influenced civil law traditions worldwide, from Europe to Latin America and parts of the Middle East, becoming a model for legal systems emphasizing rationality and uniformity. While it was progressive in some respects, it also reinforced patriarchal authority and limited women's rights, reflecting contemporary social norms. Napoleon's legal legacy illustrates how law can serve as a tool of state building, modernization, and imperial control, shaping societies long after his empire collapsed. Napoleon Bonaparte not only shaped Europe through his own actions but also sought to secure his legacy by placing members of his family on thrones across the continent. His strategy involved marrying political ambition with dynastic rule, a move designed to consolidate French influence and create loyal monarchies sympathetic to his interests. Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804, signaling the start of a new dynasty, the Bonapartes. He appointed his siblings and relatives as rulers of conquered or allied territories. His brother Joseph became king of Naples and later Spain, Louis ruled Holland, Jerome was made king of Westphalia, Eliza and Pauline were given control over smaller duchies. These appointments aimed to spread Napoleonic reforms and strengthen his political network, effectively turning Europe into a family empire. However, the effectiveness of this system varied. Some relatives lacked political skill or popular support, leading to instability and resistance, particularly in Spain where Joseph Bonaparte's rule sparked widespread revolt. This familial empire also underscored the tension between revolutionary meritocracy and traditional hereditary monarchy. While Napoleon promoted advancement based on ability within France, he relied on family ties to secure power abroad. Ultimately, the Bonaparte family's reigns were often short-lived, collapsing with Napoleon's downfall. Nevertheless, this strategy reflects Napoleon's efforts to legitimize his rule and ensure the durability of his empire through dynastic control, intertwining personal ambition with the broader European political order. Napoleon Bonaparte's military conquests and administrative reforms played a crucial role in shaping the modern concept of nationalism across Europe and beyond. Before Napoleon, loyalty was often oriented around local rulers, dynasties, or religious affiliations rather than the idea of a nation-state united by a common identity. Napoleon's expansion of French influence introduced new administrative systems, legal codes, and centralized governance to various territories, which inadvertently fostered a sense of national identity among occupied peoples. His policies spread the ideals of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity, though often paradoxically enforced through imperial rule. Resistance against Napoleonic occupation helped spark nationalist movements in countries such as Germany, Italy, and Spain, where diverse regions and states began to see themselves as part of a larger nation. The Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal, for example, became a fight not only against French rule but for national liberation. Similarly, the German states, under French domination, developed early nationalist sentiments that would later fuel unification efforts. Napoleon's legal reforms and the Napoleonic Code also laid institutional foundations that contributed to the modern nation-state concept by promoting uniform laws and citizenship. While Napoleon's empire ultimately collapsed, the nationalist ideas that grew during his era deeply influenced 19th-century revolutions and the redrawing of Europe's political map. His legacy is complex. Both a catalyst for nationalism and a symbol of imperial ambition, Napoleon reshaped how peoples understood their identities and political aspirations. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of history's most famous figures, surrounded by myths and legends, but many interesting truths stand out. Contrary to popular belief, Napoleon was not particularly short for his time. He stood around 5 feet 6 or 7 inches tall, average height for an 18th-century Frenchman. The myth of his short stature largely came from British propaganda and confusion over measurement units. Remarkably, Napoleon became a military genius at a very young age, rising quickly after his success at the Siege of Toulon in 1793, when he was promoted to brigadier general at just 24 years old. Beyond the battlefield, Napoleon was an avid reader who carried books on history, philosophy, and literature during his campaigns, showing a deep intellectual curiosity. One of his greatest legacies is the Napoleonic Code, a comprehensive legal framework that unified French law and influenced legal systems around the world, laying the groundwork for modern civil law. On a more unusual note, some accounts suggest Napoleon suffered from ailurophobia, a fear of cats, which contrasts with his otherwise commanding presence. Napoleon married twice, first to Josephine, a passionate and often turbulent relationship, and later to Marie-Louise of Austria to secure political alliances and produce an heir. Despite his imperial grandeur, Napoleon preferred simple foods such as chicken and vegetables rather than lavish feasts. After his downfall, Napoleon experienced exile twice, first to Elba and later to the remote island of Saint Helena, where he spent his final years. His name became so legendary that it was used commercially to brand products ranging from pastries to cigars, reflecting his enduring cultural influence. Finally, Napoleon was a master of propaganda, carefully shaping his public image through art, newspapers, and military bulletins, often amplifying his victories and minimizing his losses. These fun facts reveal the complexities of Napoleon's character beyond the battlefield and the empire.